Late 1967. In Vietnam, nearly 1,000 Americans are dying each month. In Washington, the anti-war movement attacks the Department of Defense. It is the most violent dissent in America since the Civil War. October 67. The march on the Pentagon culminates a year of rising protest over Vietnam. More than 50,000 gather. It is the first of many anti-war marches against the federal government. And it brings together the diverse elements of the peace movement: pacifists, communists, black militants, students, and professors. Their only point of agreement: stop the war in Vietnam. The Pentagon protest has two main factions, the pacifists and the student activists, led by Jerry Rubin.
We had to create the image of a massive outpouring of public reaction against the war aimed at the Pentagon. I believe the Pentagon demonstration was the turning point in the anti-war effort. I believe it was the most important demonstration that took place in the entire decade against the war, including Chicago. I believed it captured the imagination of young people, and my idea was that the anti-war movement had to be daring, had to be bold, had to be confrontational, had to really grab the imagination of the country. And so we said we're going to close down the Pentagon, no halfway measures.
As the huge protest march begins, the pacifist group tries to keep order. The militants, however, are prepared for violence. Jerry Rubin.
The only way this war is going to end is if we have war in the streets. And when people see there's going to be war in the streets of America, then they're going to stop dropping bombs on Vietnam 10,000 miles away to stop the war at home.
Peace now, 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 peace now.
I hope to build a mass movement that would reach into every level of American society, that would use Vietnam as a model for understanding what social changes are needed at home. So I saw the anti-war struggle as a moral crusade to wake up the slumbering morality that exists in all of us and that exists in this country. If the Vietnam War did not exist, we would have had to create it.
Lyndon Johnson told the nation, have no fear of escalation. I am trying everyone to flee. Though it isn't really war, we're sending 60,000 more to help save Vietnam from the enemy.
10,000 police, National Guardsmen, and soldiers assemble to protect the Pentagon. The troops carry tear gas and heavy truncheons, but their rifles are not loaded. The demonstrators are beaten back from the Pentagon's main entrance. Close to 1,000 are arrested during the weekend confrontation. The Johnson administration sees the peace movement as prolonging the war. Secretary of State Dean Rusk.
If we had seen 50,000 people demonstrating around the headquarters in Hanoi calling for peace, we would have thought the war was over. and we would have been right. But they could see 50,000 people demonstrating around the Pentagon in Washington. So what conclusions would they draw from that? I think there were those who persuaded them not to come to the conference table, not to try to find a peaceful solution, but to persist and win politically what they could not win militarily. And in that judgment, it turned out they were right.
The fear of domestic violence rallies the public behind President Johnson. Pacifist leader David Dellinger is disappointed.
At that time, there was a crisis of confidence within the movement. We didn't shut down the Pentagon. The war was continuing, and a lot of people began to think we didn't have the power that we should have.
By late '67, nearly 500,000 U.S. troops are in Vietnam. 16,000 Americans have died in combat. The U.S. increases pressure on North Vietnam and now bombs industrial targets close to the cities. Dellinger visits North Vietnam.
The theory was that they were bombing only steel and concrete, that it was a surgical war, that they were, maintaining humanitarian standards. When I got over there, I found out that churches, schools, hospitals, houses, entire villages were being wiped out. People just discovered that the United States was fighting an entirely different kind of war than it claimed, and it was violating all of the international laws of war.
President Johnson responds.
I understand the feelings of those who regret that we must undertake air attacks. I share those feelings. We have carefully limited those raids. They've been directed at concrete and steel, and not human life.
I brought back, for example, an anti-personnel bomb. Each of them released these little pellets, which were absolutely useless against steel and concrete, to use Johnson's phrase, and were only good against people.
Prominent anti-war activists are invited to North Vietnam. Their accounts of civilian destruction fuel the growing anti-war movement. This is part of Hanoi's strategy. North Vietnamese diplomat Ha Van Lao.
Nous considérons que le mouvement anti-guerre
We considered the anti-war movement in the United States to be one of the important factors which helped us to win the victory and end the war.
terminer la guerre.
America's traditional allies turn against it over Vietnam. The British Labour government is mildly critical, but militants riot outside the U.S. Embassy. In France, both government and public strongly oppose a war they abandoned 13 years earlier. December '67. President Johnson visits Australia, which has 8,000 combat troops in Vietnam. But anti-war feeling confronts Johnson wherever he goes. Internationally, the war is seen as a David and Goliath struggle, with the world cheering David. The hostility of its friends sharpens America's internal divisions. In Congress, the influential chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee urges peace, Senator William Fulbright.
Well, I made up my mind a good while ago that I do not think that the vital interest of the United States is involved in Vietnam, and that the wise course for this country to take is to seek a political settlement.
The president is increasingly intolerant of opposition and removes advisors who question his policies. Fulbright is shunned.
The president, of course, made public speeches. I was there one day out at the Armory when I wasn't any farther from here than I am to you. And that was when he used the phrase, the nervous Nellies and the sunshine patriots, and no one stand up to support the president, and everybody hoops and hollered, and you were made to look like a traitor, in effect.
Parades to support the war become as frequent as the protests. Most Americans fear that the anti-war movement may encourage much wider racial and social unrest. war divides the churches. Two Catholic priests, the Berrigan brothers, become national anti-war leaders. Father Daniel Berrigan.
We are ready for more jail and more trials and more conspiracy indictments. And this not because we are grown cynical or interiorly violent ourselves, but because we look upon Caesar with a skeptical and temperate and mature eye of the Christian.
Black leaders swing the powerful civil rights movement against the war. They charge that black soldiers are fighting and dying in disproportionate numbers. Militant Stokely Carmichael.
There is no need to go to Vietnam and shoot somebody who a honky says is your enemy. We're going to shoot the cops who are shooting our black brothers in the back in this country. That's where we're going. But when I die, I'm going to die with my boots on, and it's going to be in this country. And it's going to be fighting for what I know is right, the liberation of black people, nothing else, nothing else. And what we're going to say across this country, from Muhammad Ali to the little black boy in Cardozo High School, hell no, we won't go.
(1968). Vietnam's distant battles reach closer to America. The U.S. command in Vietnam wants 670,000 troops and wants mobilization of civilian reserves. Anti-war protest increases as more and more young Americans are personally affected by the draft. The call-up reaches into small towns for younger men. In Westchester, California, 19-year-old Larry Francis has returned his draft card as a protest. The Army then speeds his call-up. This is the day he is supposed to report for induction. His friends gather to encourage him.
In his hands he's got Larry Francis. In his hands he's got...
He is supported by his parents.
In his hands he's got the whole world in his hands.
Larry Francis tells his local draft board that he won't go to Vietnam. Thousands choose prison rather than register for service.
He's got the whole world in his hands.
And the way we're messing ourselves up shows in many ways. It shows in the fact that at this very moment, 500,000 of our friends and our brothers are killing and dying in a jungle 10,000 miles away. And it shows in those cards we all carry in our pockets. Well, I'm finished. I'm a free man today.
But I ain't marching anymore. It's always the old who lead us to the wars, always the young to fall. But I ain't marching anymore. No, I ain't marching anymore.
A celebrity who successfully fights the draft on religious terms. Boxing champion Muhammad Ali.
I'd rather face machine gun fire before deviate from the teachings of Almighty God and the religion of Islam. I would die.
Ali says he would go down fighting rather than go to Vietnam or to jail.
I'm not saying where I will go. I'm just letting you know that I'm going to stick 1,000% to my religious beliefs, even if it means die. You figure out the rest.
Men attending university cannot be called into the military, so American universities are the heart of the anti-war cause. Some who join the campus protesters bring world attention. Joan Baez with her songs, husband David Harris by going to jail.
It was grossly unfair, and if America was going to fight wars, white college kids ought to fight them every bit as much as blacks and Chicanos. So my first act was to refuse to accept the student deferment, and failing all other things, to have left the country. But my feeling was it was my country, and that if anybody ought to leave, I thought Lyndon Johnson should be the one leaving, not me.
Harris serves 20 months of a 2-year sentence.
Well, I did more time than any of the Watergate people except Howard Hunt and Gordon Liddy, the real criminals of that period never did any time.
40,000 draft dodgers and deserters leave America. 30,000 go to Canada, where many will stay on years after the war. By 1968, American combat deaths exceed 1,000 a month. A senior Democrat decides to oppose President Johnson and seek the presidency on an anti-war ticket. Senator Eugene McCarthy.
I said that the opposition to the war would begin to develop when they were sending bodies back, not to Louisville, Kentucky, and Memphis and New York, but when they begin to come back into towns of 5 or 10,000 or smaller communities, that these are historic events in a town of that size, that so-and-so's son has been brought back dead and been buried here. As the death rate and the injury rate grew, there was, I think, a very gradual growth of opposition. And then the media sort of began to cover it. Life began to print whole pages of pictures of the people who had died in Vietnam. And you say be 100 or 200, I've forgotten how many on a page, that the public began to look at what was happening to persons. And I concluded that the only way you could do anything about it was to really take it to the public. And I said, well, really the only way you can do it is to challenge Johnson.
McCarthy enters the primaries with the polls giving him only a few % of the vote. Johnson appears invulnerable. Then the war takes a dramatic turn. January '68, the communist Tet Offensive sweeps across Vietnam. Television brings the month-long fight for the cities of Vietnam into the living rooms of America and brings the first widespread doubts. Even President Johnson's close aides advise him to get out of Vietnam. Except for secure military bases, Johnson faces hostile crowds almost everywhere he travels. McCarthy's presidential campaign is now galvanized by voter discontent over the war. McCarthy's primary victories encouraged Robert Kennedy to enter the presidential race on an anti-war ticket.
1960s or the 1950s.
Opinion polls show that 63% of the public oppose President Johnson's Vietnam commitment.
Good evening, my fellow Americans.
March 31st, 1968. Johnson tells a stunned nation he is stepping down.
Accordingly, I shall not seek and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
So when LBJ came on and shocked all of us by saying I shall not run for re-election, we knew then that we were in the driver's seat, that we were in the 60s the driving force in society, and that we were going to drive home the point that you cannot treat poor people, blacks, Vietnamese, without any humanity and have a safe and secure home yourself.
Spring 1968. First, Martin Luther King is assassinated, then Robert Kennedy. The violent deaths of the two leading anti-war moderates is followed by political chaos on a scale unknown since the Civil War. The black ghettos erupt across America. The anti-war protests are larger and more violent. One Washington protest is contained by 15,000 troops, more than are engaged in any battle in Vietnam. August '68. 10,000 anti-war demonstrators converge on Chicago for the Democratic Convention. Half are supporters of presidential candidate McCarthy, but a militant faction announces it will disrupt the convention. 26,000 police, troops, and National Guardsmen, 2 for each demonstrator, are assembled by Chicago's Mayor Daley.
This administration, our administration, and the people of Chicago have never and will condone brutality at any time, but they will never permit a lawless, violent group of terrorists to menace the lives of millions of people, destroy the purpose of this national convention, and take over the streets of Chicago.
But first we rallied in Grant Park in Chicago, and early in the rally, a bloodied, beaten up demonstrator shinnied up the flagpole and replaced the American flag with his bloody shirt. He said, let the world see that is what's happening in Chicago. But when that happened, that became a signal for the police to charge the crowd. And I shall never forget them.
They're a pitiful handful. They have almost no support, but by golly, they get the cooperation of the news media. They're built into something really big. They're referred to as kids. They're referred to as yippies. Gentlemen, the hardcore leadership of this group are communist.
By forcing the government to overreact at home, we were, in a sense, spotlighting to the American people the overreaction of America overseas. Chicago was an education for the American people about Vietnam and about oppression in the ghettos and about just the whole use of physical force to solve social problems.
The anti-war movement has no presidential candidate. Robert Kennedy is dead. McCarthy lacks popular support. The Chicago protest is to express frustration. As the marchers move through downtown Chicago, the police charge. A government report later describes the event as a police riot. Television scenes convey the sense of a nation destroying itself. "800 demonstrators are injured, some seriously."
There was no proportion between numbers and no proportion between what the police and the military did and what the threat to them was. It was sort of waiting to charge, and when there was no provocation, they charged anyway. And we set up the hospital just to bring these people in and sew them up.
Trying to fend off some of the blows. I came back up, and they said, "Get out of here." And I said, "I'm trying to." In which case, they hit me again, and hit me again.
So that was sort of the whole mood of the convention. Unjustified, unnecessary violence and oppression and abuse by the police and the National Guard.
With Vice President Hubert Humphrey nominated, McCarthy delegates hold a candlelight requiem. As one delegate put it, this convention tonight elected Richard Nixon. The Vietnam War will last 4 more years. An historian later said, in 1968, America lived through more history than it could digest. The anti-war movement fades as the Johnson presidency ends. President Nixon withdraws troops. To fill the gap, he steps up bombing. Anti-war leaders wonder what their efforts have achieved.
In the year 2000, without a doubt, we're going to look back at the 60s and say that the people who represented George Washington and Thomas Paine and the real patriotism of America were the people who were opposing the war because the war was against America's interests. It hurt America. It was not in America's interest to go to Vietnam. So I felt throughout the whole war period that I was a patriot, a nationalist, fighting for America. Had America been able to win the war in Vietnam, America would have stomped in there and conquered that country, and the American people would have gone behind the war. But because, fortunately, America could not win, the soul of America got challenged, and America had to really face its own soul and come to terms with defeat.
How many men must die to justify? What did happen, I think, was as a result of 68, that the people running the war were left without any moral justification. It would be a long time before a president will assume automatically, as they did in the past, that they both had the right to this kind of moral support for a war in Congress and out, or that they would get it. And that may be the most significant historical result of the whole anti-war movement.
And I think the real decision to bring this to an end was not made on college campuses or in the streets, but when people at the grassroots, maybe the first half of 1968, came to the conclusion that if we could not tell them when this struggle was going to be over, we might as well chuck it. But the American people at the grassroots had come to the decision that we should abandon this effort. And the American people have the power to do it, and they have the right to do it in our system.